A dragon had it. And it was a quest. There were hobbits. It was, wow. Took hours, days, weeks. Hodor. Oh, sorry. Wrong one. Wrong show. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce pseudo David Lankes, who will be appearing via Hollywood and Vimeo, the video service, but he's recorded a presentation for us. After that, we will be talking to David on Skype, and we will asking him about his wedding ring, see if he still has it, and if we need to do anything about it. So, without further ado. I've been told it is not the Zagruber film. Peter Jackson didn't make it. Or Peter Jackson did not make it.
Hi, my name is David Lankes, and I'm here to talk to you about innovation and libraries supporting and sponsoring innovation. That's why I come to a place like this. This is the Icebox at the iSchool at Syracuse University. We built it to be a place of innovation where people could have meetings, think about what they're doing, start small businesses, have coffee clutches, give quick presentations, sit in fancy chairs and hang out, because that's what innovation's about. The startup and the small businesses is all about the idea of this sort of Silicon Valley feel. We have iPads along the wall. We have walls that you can write on. We have presentations that you can give at any given point. We have faculty advisors. We're ready to go. But what if this isn't the way that innovation has to look? Because innovation itself should be a creative process. To a degree, this sort of resembles the Silicon Valley model, which values code, creativity, and money. But that's not what every community certainly values. What if we had creativity look like our communities? Here, hold on one second. Perhaps innovation looks like this. What? Just because you're stuck inside doesn't mean I have to be. We're out here in the field of the university where we're having, I love this, a rocket competition. Here's a community that valued more than just money and code, but they valued the idea of STEM education and engineering. So how did they do it? They brought kids together to launch rockets. Innovation doesn't have to look like software. It doesn't have to look like iPads. It can look like cardboard tubes flying into space. So innovation is all about the values of the community and how we incent the community to try new things. This should be fun.
For the ramparts we won, were so gallantly streaming, and the rock.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Good try. Go! There we go.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with making money. Here, a little less rockety noise. Also not a bad view. I'm actually in Lafayette, New York, which is about 15-20 minutes north of Syracuse. And I'm here to talk again about innovation and how innovation can look differently. Now, that's a pretty view, but trust me, it gets much prettier in the fall when all those leaves turn red and gold and yellow and, oh, just amazing. And the place I'm standing gets a lot busier. And where am I standing? I'm standing in a place called Beacon Skiff. Beacon Skiff, to me, represents a sort of local form of innovation. It started as not much more than a roadside stand, a place you could pull over and pick some apples right off the orchard trees. Then they added tractors, and they added a small shack that you could then get fried apple fritters, and apple donuts, and apple cider, and all these wonderful things. And it kept growing and growing, and the parking lot that you see that I'm looking at got bigger and bigger because so did Beacon Skiff's operations and how they began to define what ecotourism was. What you're looking at is the new Beacon Skiff, which includes a distillery, apple vodka, hard apple cider sold internationally, the idea of a cafe, bakery, store, places for people to come, places for people to spend the day. This innovation didn't come from compilers and apps and high bandwidth connections. It came from an understanding of what this community did well and what they could build off of. It came from an understanding of what they knew. Farming is making. Apples are farming. And the idea that we can get out there and begin making within the local community, make it larger and more of a resource, more employment. Over there is the cafe that's open today. This is in June. They have concerts going on the weekends now. So my point is, when we think of innovation, when we think of Silicon Valley, we think that we have this image of what innovation is. It's something with mock turtlenecks and high bandwidth connections, compilers and apps. And those are important. Certainly Make and Skiff relies on its web pages. It relies on it to let people all over the country and increasingly all over the world know what's happening here and to come and join and participate in that. It has retail chains. It has supply side, all that wonderful stuff. But ultimately, what it has is a connection to the people, and a connection to the earth, and a connection to the community that says, we could try something new here, and it doesn't necessarily have to start with code. It can start with apples, start with farms, start with tractors.
So let's talk a little bit more about what I mean by innovation itself. So let's get our definition straight. What is innovation? Well, first of all, let's talk about what innovation is not, which is innovation is not necessarily invention. That means that, a lot of people think that innovation is really hard because I'm not an engineer, I'm not a graphic designer, I'm just a librarian, how can I innovate, right? Because innovation, as we all know, is iPads and creating software and chips, and it sounds like I have a problem with iPads, but really I don't. My point being that innovation isn't the idea of creating something brand new from scratch. It can be, but more often than not, what innovation really is about taking ideas and applying them in a novel situation, or taking bits and pieces of ideas, kind of like Legos, and applying them in a unique way, or combining them in a unique way. One of my favorite innovation stories is about a fellow by the name of Danny Biasoni. And Danny used to own the Syracuse Nationals, the Syracuse Nats that eventually became the 76ers. And it was a first professional basketball team, and it was here in Syracuse, and Danny had a problem, which was basketball was extremely boring to watch. Now, I know just after the NBA Finals that may be hard to believe, but at the time, it was a defensive game. What happens is you would bounce and get the ball, and you would go ahead, and you would get ahead, right? So you would make a basket, you'd get ahead. You'd then sit on the ball for as long as you could until the other team fouled or stole it. But it made for really low-scoring, boring-to-watch games. We're talking like 50 to 60s, scores of 21 to 19 kind of thing. And Danny was bored out of his mind. And so what he looked around and what he found was actually a college coach who had come up with a unique solution. And what he did was he put a clock up above the two baskets and said, you only have a certain amount of time to make a shot. He invented the shot clock. Well, Danny looked at this and said, why not? Why can't I take an idea from college and an idea in the pros and put them together? And he said, what would the ideal score for a pro basketball be? About 80 points divided by the minutes played. Said you got about 24 seconds to make a shot. Once you get the ball, you have 24 seconds to shoot the ball. Change the game overnight. Suddenly, instead of people sitting there and hanging onto the ball and keeping it, they were running and shooting. They were jumping. They were trying to get slam dunks. Then eventually the three-pointers came. The game became much more interesting and energetic to watch. And at the time, television, which was covering baseball, was looking for interesting, energetic sports that they could broadcast. And they suddenly found this new revitalized basketball that was moving everything around, and they said, that's what we need. That's what we need. And so they began paying major contracts, and now what's happened is because Danny got bored and took a really simple idea that was invented in another context called the shot clock and implemented it, turned it into a massive multi-billion-dollar television empire and contract. Innovation doesn't mean that you had to come up with scratch, and it doesn't mean you had to do something big. To Danny, that was a relatively small change, but it totally had an amazing effect that he couldn't have anticipated. Now, since I'm stealing and talking about innovation, let me steal another one and talk about the difference between innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm going to steal from Meg Bacchus, who's right now at Chattanooga Public Library.
Here's one way to think about the difference between entrepreneurship and innovation, and it involves the idea of buying a car. Don't worry, Gwen, I'm being careful. When you go to buy a car, it's a big investment. If you want a new car, we're talking, $30,000 or, kind of car that my son wants, $100,000. It's a big investment. They need to check your credit. They need to make sure that you're trustworthy. You need to give them some sort of collateral. It's all this goes into it. And so the truth is that you have to sit there and think about, is it going to be worth it? Is it going to be worth it in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? There's a lot of risk involved. If you don't pay it off, will they take it back? Will you lose your credit rating? All of this stuff. This is the entrepreneurship model. This is the market model. This is the idea of entering in and starting up a business. And this is what the libraries were presenting. They were bringing in lawyers and accountants and startup people and everyone to talk about starting your own business. And people were sitting in the audience going, I just need a ride. And so when you need a ride, is it easier to buy the car or to call up a friend who has a car that you can borrow? And that's the idea of innovation. And what Meg thought about was, many times these ideas are like borrowing a car, except instead of a car, we're borrowing expertise, we're borrowing time, we're borrowing software, we're borrowing space, we're borrowing resources, we're borrowing all these things. And libraries are into borrowing. We're really good at lending stuff out. We have the idea of not only can you lend out books and 3D and Makerspaces and places, we can do all sorts of stuff. In fact, one of my favorite stories comes out of I Lead You. In Eureka, Illinois, they don't have a lot of restaurants. It's a small town. And what happened was, Chef Katie, who is a commercial chef who just moved into the area, went over to the librarian and said, there aren't enough places to eat here. Now, rather than the librarian saying, you're correct, and here's a book on business, and here's a business plan, and starting a business, and we'll get you all set up and getting into that risky market stuff, the librarian did something much more brilliant. They said, you see that corner of our property? That's yours. Take it. And every Tuesday, Chef Katie would set up a table and a tent and bring food for lunch. And pretty soon it turned into Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And pretty soon it turned into a commercial kitchen and a catering business. And that's what libraries are really good at. Not necessarily bankrolling the innovation, but giving the encouragement, identifying the motivation, and lending out resources that they have. In this case, not technology and 3D printers, not books, not themselves necessarily, but their space. And this is the idea of innovation at its best. Libraries do this all the time. And the idea is that we can do it in a large scale. We can connect people across libraries. We can organize the information they work with. We can use tools like we learned in I Lead You to access expertise and websites and all of these different things without having to put them into the whole market. Don't worry, I'm almost there.
So there you go. Innovation. How easy is that? I mean, all you have to do is talk to our community, see what they want to grow, provide them with a facility, maybe a 3D printer, maybe a business plan, maybe a lawyer, what have you, some space, and we're done, right? Piece of cake. No, not quite. And actually, we have to talk about two more issues. One, how innovation occurs, and the second is innovation is not just about the people we serve. It also includes you. So we have to talk about what it takes for librarians to be innovative. And for that, I'm on wheels. Rollerblade. So, mind me if I suddenly trip. Don't worry, Glenn. I'm being careful. What we have to learn about innovation is that we have to try again and again and again. Innovation is not something you do on a schedule. Innovation is not something that happens when you plan. You don't create a vice president of innovation and hope for the best. It has to happen across the organization and institution, across the community, but also across librarians. Paraprofessionals can come up with innovation. Reference librarians can come up with innovation. Directors, God forbid, can come up with innovation. But what they have to do is they have to try it. They have to get out there and try it. And little things. It doesn't have to be big. We don't have to come up with a policy to change the whole world. It doesn't even have to be a multi-$1,000 purchase of a 3D printer. Sometimes it could just be trying a little quick new technique at the reference desk, trying a new technique for checkout, saving 3 seconds, 5 seconds in shelving, reorganizing how we do book delivery, what have you. But you gotta try it, and you gotta not be worried about falling. It's kind of like how you learn to rollerblade. You get out, you fall on your butt. You get up, you try again, you fall on your butt. You get up, you try again. And hopefully someday, if you're like me, you don't fall on your butt anymore. So innovation is all about trying, failing, doing it quick, not waiting for a policy for everything. That's what it's involved. I'm going to pay attention now before I fall on my butt again, and you think about that. You know, if there's two quotes you've heard by me, one is bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, great libraries build communities, and the other is I consider a room full of books a closet and an empty room with a librarian in it to be a library. Many people have wondered what's the difference between a library and a community space, a community center in my point of view, to which I normally respond, what's wrong with being at the center of a community? But actually I'm going to flip that around with a larger answer, and the answer is sort of sitting here behind my shoulder here, the Little Free Library. I love these things, I really do. They are community oriented, you put them up, you put some books, people take them, leave them, etc. But let me ask you this, what can that do that yours can't do? If you look at the collection as your first and foremost thing, if you define innovation as learning where people can get books and therefore learn to do stuff, that's enough. It's a space, it's got books, it's got materials to inspire. What doesn't it have? Well, the short answer is it doesn't have you. That's why I'm on a noisy road to talk about this. Cement truck. It doesn't have you to inspire. It doesn't have you to facilitate. It doesn't have you to point things out, to react, to select, to pick, to look at an open field and see rockets, to look at an open apple orchard and see tourism. The innovation that we're talking about in libraries and being an engine of innovation is the core of being a librarian. And the core of being in a community, knowing the community, talking with the community, being part of the community. The Little Free Library movement's fantastic. Communities can get involved. I think libraries should build them. But I don't think they ever substitute for the idea of an innovation center, for a center of the community that truly values conversation, innovation, understanding, taking us to our next level. Those things over there, let's face it, they remind us of our past more than of our future. What libraries need to be are engines of innovation that help develop tomorrow. In Alan Kay's famous quote, the best way to predict the future is to invent it, that's your job. Good luck.
Hi, all. This is like Cheers. Norm.
So beards in, out, what's going on, man?
Yeah. Well, I'm just happy to be furry. That's all it was.
I tried that line, it didn't work.
So what I want to know is, did the candid Lankes' out about town thing work better, or would you rather have me sitting here giving you the Fields of Abaddon speech?
I was waiting for the bungee jump.
Yeah, innovation.
The doctor has not approved bungee jumping yet, however.
So I guess parachuting's out too.
Well, I don't know. There's no bungee involved.
Yeah.
How did you technically do that? How did you have the camera out there?
Yeah, what was your rig?
That's a great question. So I bought a camera, which is just a standard point and shoot camera. I'm using a Sony one that allows you to use your phone as a remote control, so you can zoom in and see the picture. And then for $10 off of Amazon, you can get a selfie pole. And it's just an extended pole. It's a,
That's what they're calling that now?
Did the doctor give you permission for that? Sorry. Go ahead, please.
and it's got a screw on the end.
Of course it does.
It's a tripod mount, but you can hold it so whatever distance you want. And so then I was just holding it in front of me and skating and walking and talking. So
For $8, you too can produce it and pretend that it's not just you holding it up to your face. Same thing.
Any question?
I have a question for you guys. Can I ask you a question?
Yes. Sure.
So you've been in this innovation space, and I imagine that somewhere there's been a discussion of makerspaces in your libraries or your settings. Do you guys get that sort of, I mean, I perceive when I have those discussions, there's this sort of template of the Silicon Valley template for a makerspace. Do you guys feel that pressure, or is that just me?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it really hit me because I was watching one night, I watched Veep, one of the episodes of Veep where the vice president goes out and visits a Silicon Valley Apple-like company. And then right after, I watched the first episode of Silicon Valley off of HBO, and they just skewered Silicon Valley. It was beautiful. And it just occurred to me that that's what we were all doing, is we were all chasing this ideal that didn't necessarily look like our communities. And I don't know, I'm sorry that some of those statistics probably flipped up pretty quickly. But to me, it was really interesting. I was having a discussion with Lauren Britton, who started the first makerspace at Fayetteville Free Library, and luckily she's now a doctoral student. And she said, yeah, Chattanooga, which does brilliant, amazing stuff, had this really great thing where they were going to put up weather balloons, and they're going to get real-time weather data, and they were going to hack it together, and it was really cool. And then they put a picture up of this happening on their library website, and it was 9 white guys sitting in a room. And so I said, oh, that's the name of your next paper, 9 white guys in a room. And because that Maker magazine, that Maker profile that I have, and I can send it forward, 90% white males, average income over $100,000. I don't think, these are the people that we're really worried about saving from the bottom rung of the economy. And so how can we take this kind of technology, these ideas, this innovation, and make it available to the people who don't look like me, who have low incomes, who couldn't afford this, who can come up with the next brilliant idea? And sometimes it's not 3D printers. Sometimes, knitting clubs can be maker spaces. And the idea is that it really is a culture that we want to give people the feeling that they can control and contribute to, and not simply come to a program where they can use it like a 3D Xerox machine and just pick up an image and print it, that kind of thing. Is anyone going to join us for the MOOC, the New Librarianship MOOC, starting next week? All right. So that's going to start on Monday. It's set for 4 weeks. It's frankly a pretty intensive workload. So if it stretches out, we'll let it stretch out. Don't worry about catching up. And the good news is when we did this last summer, we had 2,000 people, and this time we have 100. So we can actually have a reasonable conversation and keep up. But I'm looking forward to that next week as well. So we're also going to make sure that you have a copy of that New Librarianship, Atlas of New Librarianship. So you'll have the text for it. I don't think we've officially figured out how to give it to you yet, but I'll probably just send out an email with a download link to the listserv. So.
Got a question?
Dave, whenever you were talking just a minute ago about having programs that reflect the community in a better way, do you have any, I think that one of the ways we do that is we involve the community in designing the programs, because it's just impossible for us to know what's going to be relevant when we don't reflect that, and some of us don't. So do you have any good examples of libraries doing that?
I do, and it's actually a person. And hopefully we can, Gwen's always got her ears open for good people. So Meg Bacchus, who's at the university, or is at Chattanooga Public Library, and was one of my students, I'm proud to say. I learned a lot from her. And she went up to the North Onondaga Public Library. Now, this is a long way to go for her. We had conversations while she was at NOPL, and she was the adult services librarian. Pause for humorous effect about selfie polls. And anyway, her job was to sit at a desk and have someone walk up and say, hey, can we? And her job was to say yes. And so the way she looked at doing programming was hearing suggestions. And that turned into, for example, one was a square dancing night. And they didn't have room in the library to do square dancing, so they did it at an ice rink that was just down the street, hopefully not on the ice, but it was everything. And the next day when she came in, her fellow librarians looked at her and said, so what was that? And she said, it was a library program. And her fellow librarian said, no, it wasn't. It wasn't in the library. once she yelled at me because I would listen and it was safe about that. We sort of talked about other things, and she then ended up just sort of saying, you know, it doesn't matter. We're just going to do what people want. So there was a lot of people coming in wanted gardening, and the idea was, you know, we could have given them books on gardening and lectures on gardening. She said, well, you know, we've got this plot of land sitting next to us and a hose. Let's garden. And so they created community gardens, community plots. At the end of, you know, in September, when you end up with 500 million tomatoes and you're just sick of tomatoes, they started talking about local sourcing, local food pantries. The idea being, because I think that was Beck, the idea being that she wasn't sitting there going, I think it's reading time. I think she was listening and saying, what do we want? What do we want? What do we want? And that often involves getting out of the building. That often involves going and talking to communities. Now, to be clear, you can't do everything the community wants, but a couple of things make it better. One, don't think that as a librarian, you have to be an expert in the topic being presented. If you're going to put a 3D printer, don't assume you have to know how to do 3D printing. That's the community's job to learn. If you're going to do talks on Civil War and gardening, it doesn't mean that you have to be the best gardener in the world. It means that you have to work with the community, find the good gardeners, and invite them in to prepare that program. You need to get out and talk to prioritized populations, right? I say talk to the whole community, but the whole community is going to be a mishmash and sometimes conflicting and such. You do want to have set some priorities, for example, whether it's underserved, low literacy, is it joblessness? What are the major key areas, which is the same thing you had to do when you were developing projects. So that community member that I think they talked, that you have part of your teams, they talked about how do you talk to your community member in the first session, you're going to hear it again and again. The answer is right now, as we structured it, they're a sounding board. The truth is they should really be the sort of propeller pushing the project forward. What do they need? What do they think? How does it work? So you got to get out of the community, because if you say in your library and you say, what can we offer? It's going to turn really quickly into book talks, because we haven't really presented many other options to our communities to see about rocket launches or see about gardening programs and things like that. So. Other questions?
Well, you said that your maid, was it, was saying that when she did the square dance thing, she got this negativity from her coworkers. How did she overcome that? Or did she just leave that library for Chattanooga?
No, she did leave that library for Chattanooga, but she left it much better than when she arrived at it. And the short answer is we need to talk about insurgent guerrilla librarianship tactics. It's funny, we've been having discussions of radical librarians and militant librarians, you know, just pretty soon we're going to be talking about, you know, sleeper cells of librarians and anything that's on 24. What you need to do, what she did and she understood, is that those folks who said that's not a library program because it wasn't in the library were probably not going to be her go-to people for new ideas. So the first thing she did is she began to build a network of go-to people, whether it was an old professor. In her case, it was her director. Her director was fabulous in the sense that, you know, directors can be fabulous for two reasons. One, they drive innovation, or two, they support innovation. And both models work, right? So we've all seen the librarian, the director who was brought in to be brilliant and innovative, and they launch all the programs. That's great, but there are also directors who sit and say, Meg's smart, let's just support her to do what you want. So she built that network, both within the library and outside of the library. And the number one component of that were community members. So the answer was, Meg, that wasn't a library program. The answer didn't come from Meg. The answer came from the community members who had a great time at the square dance going, the library should do more of that. And Meg was smart enough and made sure that those community members came into the library and gave regular feedback to all the librarians about what worked and what didn't. So building that network, you're starting to build it from those people sitting in the seats around you. But now you need to build up your sort of people within the community who can demand it. We had this an academic librarian who wanted to start blogging about different library things, and particularly around sports and students in sports. So she was an academic librarian. She was serving lots of student athletes, and they had issues. And she wanted to start a blog saying, hey, look, pay attention to this, do this. Did you know this resource was available? And her director said, no, we don't blog here. We don't, it's unauthorized discussion. It's, no. So she said, great. Turns out student athletes love to blog when you tell them what to put on the blog. So she had them create the blog, and she fed them the information to put on it. And so she was able to accomplish what she needed. She built a closer connection with those students. And as those students, by the way, eventually graduated getting multi-million-dollar-a-year contracts, they also not only remembered their coach, they remembered their librarian when it came time to donate money back to the university. So this idea of including the community, it's not like the library's doing it plus we add the community on top of. It's the community has a need, the library pushes it along. Our job is to sit and do infrastructure. Now sometimes, and this is the other thing I get a lot, is, Dave, you talk about libraries being more than books, but whenever we ask our community, all they say is books, 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 books. Have we ever given them an alternative? Have we ever said, another story, librarians sitting down with a focus group saying, how can the library be better? And the initial focus group went, libraries are women, and it's books, and it's quiet, and it's useless. And then what they did is they took that same group of people and they started saying, well, what if we Makerspace? What if we manga collection? What if we, and some of these examples. And by the way, did you know that the library X, Y, or Z, suddenly they did to the same focus group and they said, oh, this is cool. This is what we need to do. If you just go to your community and say, should we need a makerspace? They'll look at you and say, what's a makerspace and why should a library do it? If you work at them and say, did you see what you could do over here? Maybe we could be part of that. So we need to incent our communities to think bigger about us by giving them positive examples. And so hopefully the I Lead You project you're working on becomes selling cards, not simply to say, here's a good project, but think about beyond what you've used us in the past. What could we do today? I know you heard from Eli this time. Eli's fun. I love Eli. And did he tell you about the production librarians? Yeah? Great. So he had all this brilliant senior staff that helped redo their catalog lying around, and he said, great, now instead of giving them more library projects, we'll give them community projects. So someone can come in and say, I'm building a video, I don't know how. He could assign them a production librarian to help them do that. That's idea of getting them to expect more and see more. Never make the mistake of asking someone what they want because they can't tell you. What do you want? The only answer they can logically give you is what you're doing, but more of it. If you want them to do different, you have to show them those examples. You have to give them. And if you put up 10 examples and they say 9 of them are crap, it's back to that, learn from it and try something different quick. Fall on your butt, get up. Fall on your butt, get up.
What did Jeff say? What did Jeff Pincus say? What was his motto?
You don't fail. You just
You win or you learn.
You don't fail, you win, or you learn.
There you go. You win. You don't fail. You win or you learn. I just saw that one. I like that one too. But let's be honest. Sometimes you fail. Sometimes you're sitting on your butt, looking around, and going, "This did not happen. This was not right."
What did I learn from this?
That's correct. I learned never to do this again. Yes.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts, ideas for the good of the order?
In this way of innovation, how do you see school libraries participating in that?
So let me tell you my favorite school library story. All I do is tell other people's stories, because it makes me sound smart. Sue Kowalski is the school library media specialist at Pine Grove Middle School in East Syracuse, Manoa. She received the AAS School Library Media Program of the Year award a couple of years ago. And one of the things that she's done is she created something called the I-Team. And she stole it. The two things she stole from Syracuse University, which is, we're glad to have her as our alum, is the Blame Dave strategy and the I-Team. The Blame Dave strategy is great, which is whatever you want to do, say, I'm sorry, I really wouldn't do it, but Dave's making me, right? So feel free to blame anything on me, right? You go back from I Lead You and you're like, I want a 3D printer. Dave says I have to have a 3D printer. So, like that'll help. Anyway, the I-Team was interesting because what started out was student aids. So you get a couple students and then she let the students, begin shelving and moving things around. And then she began doing collection development. She says, here's my budget. Here are a bunch of books. What do we want? and the students began choosing it. And then the students began setting up the technology in the classrooms. And then what she would do is she would get teachers coming in saying, I have a project. And rather than Sue saying, all right, I'm going to go help you work on the project, she assigned them a student to start working on the project with them. And by the third year, the teachers were requesting I students to come out and help her. They got their own t-shirts. They began selecting their own members. She empowered the students to such a point that she doesn't do shelving. That's the students, if they want to get to it, there's nothing else. She would have students calling saying, I'm sick today, I can't make it to the library. Before they would call the school, they'd call the school librarian to say, I can't make it, or I can only make 5 minutes today at the beginning of school. She doesn't need them for 5 minutes, but by God, she lets them come in for 5 minutes because that's what makes them feel important. My point of this is that what Sue has done is she's built that team, in this case, a team of students, and the innovation mechanism isn't just Sue thinking of brilliant thoughts. It's the students saying, we want to do a, what was the big thing they just did? We want to do a talent show. And Sue just went, oh. You know, and like the person who wanted to be the MC who came up with it had a speech impediment, and she's like, oh. And it turns out they got up and no one laughed at the kid. They laughed with his jokes, and everyone came up and they tried it. It's become an annual thing. And so it's Sue, the way Sue does innovation is she says yes. She looks at her number one community, which is her students, and she says, what do you want to do? I'm going to make it happen. And so that notion of a school librarian being an innovation force, then what happens is their teachers start saying, what's going on in the library? Hey, I want students working on this. When a teacher say, I have a new smart board, I need to figure it out, Sue doesn't go down and help them. She sends 2 students to go help them. They begin to see that this is a force for innovation. And when you talk about being a student-centered school, that means you give students authority and autonomy, and she proves it by doing it. So innovation, I've had a lot of librarians who look at me and say, I don't innovate. I'm a worker bee. I hate that. I'm a worker bee. You tell me what to do, I do it really, really, really well. Well, innovation sometimes gets a bad rap because you think you have to change the universe to call it innovation. The truth is that when you figure out how not to print out the form for the 3rd time, but to put it up electronically, for you, that's an innovation. And that should lead to another thing to try and another thing to try. And everyone, no matter if you're a 1-person operation or a 50 librarian operation, can innovate within their own scope. But you got to build a team to give you feedback. I mean, Gwen's tired of me sending her crazy ideas. And Gwen and Ann are on my crazy idea list, right? Whenever I have a crazy idea, I write it up and I send it to people and say, is this crazy? And luckily, they're willing to say yes on most times. But every so often they go, yeah, we should do that. I mean, you should have heard in preparation for this. You guys have the Maker Night yet? I heard about all the gadgets that you were getting to play with at this in-person session. I mean, it was the most amazing phone call I've ever been on. I think we need a 3D printer. Yes. I think we need these kind of Arduino boards. Yes. I think we need, I'm sitting there going, really? Cool. All right. I think we need, I mean, at one point I suggested having a robot me walking around doing sessions, and they said yes. It didn't happen, but you know, October's not that far away. So anyway.
We have a robotics team. That's there. See?
It's all me. Put me in, coach. Anyway, so I don't, you know, you are never able to excuse yourself from the obligation of innovation because you are a school librarian, reference librarian, library aide. You only work in a rural library. You are in a bureaucratic institution. Every barrier you give me, I can give you an example right back saying this is how it worked. State libraries. I've been in state libraries where they say, oh, we can't do anything. The state doesn't let us do it. We have to get authorized. You're sitting in the middle of the result of a state library staff going, screw it, we're going to do it, right? That's innovation that says, you know, this may be a barrier, but we can go over it. Anne is exercising plausible deniability by not being there right now.
Wow.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts?
Come back to us soon, dude.
Yeah.
I have a cancer-free summer. It's good news. We hope we have many cancer-free days after that. Thank you so much for all your support and outpouring on that. And as someone tweeted, no, I decided today was not going to be a tissue day. So we tried fun. if they bring me back in October, I promise to put on my Braveheart speech again, and we'll really rattle the cages. So. Bye.